The night it happened, the restaurant smelled like brown butter and expensive cologne, and Celeste Tran was trying very hard not to exist. That was the trick of the job, really. You moved through the room like furniture with feelings, present enough to anticipate, invisible enough not to interrupt. She had gotten good at it over 3 years at Ardent, one of those Manhattan restaurants where the prix started at $340 and the lighting was designed by someone who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. She had learned to read a table in under 30 seconds. She had learned which guests wanted warmth and which ones wanted efficiency and which ones, the dangerous kind, wanted an audience. She had not yet learned what to do about Conrad Salle. He arrived at 7:15 with 6 people in his orbit, the way powerful men always arrived. Slightly late, slightly loud, filling the room before his body had fully entered it. Celeste recognized him from the business section, from the kind of coverage that used words like visionary and disruptor without irony. Conrad Salle, 53, founder of Salle Capital, the man who had restructured 3 mid-size pharmaceutical companies in 18 months and made a number that had too many zeros doing it. He had the confidence of someone who had never once been told his joke wasn't funny. His party took table 7, the curved banquette in the northeast corner that the regulars called the throne room Celeste's section. She squared her shoulders and walked over. "Good evening. Welcome to Ardent." She set the menus down with the quiet precision that the front-of-house manager had described in training as intentional grace. "My name is Celeste. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Sal didn't look up from his phone. One of the women at the table, blonde, angular, wearing something that probably had a name, gave Celeste a smile that was genuinely warm. A man in his late 40s, silver-haired, with the measured stillness of someone who didn't need to perform, nodded at her. She filed them away. "We'll start with 2 bottles of the 09 Burgundy," Sal said, still not looking up. Then, almost as an afterthought, he glanced at her. Something moved across his face, the micro-calculation of a man who sorted people quickly. "You do have the 09. We have 4 bottles remaining," Celeste said. "The sommelier recommends decanting for at least 40 minutes. Would you like me to have him start that now?" For the first time, Sal actually looked at her. "Sure," he said, and then to the table, resuming a conversation she had clearly interrupted. "As I was saying, the issue isn't the asset itself, it's the management structure." "You can't." She went to get the wine. The first hour was uneventful. The table ordered the tasting menu, plus several supplements. They drank seriously and talked loudly about things that required no lowering of voices because the people in this room were all, in their own estimation, among equals. Celeste moved in and out, clearing, pouring, checking temperatures. The silver-haired man. She learned his name was Dr. Arthur Kimball, something in medical research, said thank you each time quietly, like he meant it. The blonde woman caught Celeste's eye once and mouthed this is incredible about the halibut. Celeste smiled back with something genuine. Sal, in the center of it all, held court. He was not a bad dinner guest in the conventional sense. He didn't snap his fingers or wave his hand impatiently. He was something more particular. He was the kind of person who treated every room as a stage and every other person in it as either an actor in his story or a prop. The waitstaff were props. Celeste understood this without bitterness. She had worked enough tables to know that this was simply a type, and types could be managed. She was managing it fine until the piano. Ardent had a baby grand in the corner near the bar, a Steinway Model B that the owner had bought at auction and displayed the way other restaurants displayed art, which was to say, impressively and mostly untouched. On Friday and Saturday evenings, a pianist named George played standards from 8 to 11. But this was Thursday, and the piano sat silent and polished under its small dedicated spotlight, and Celeste had genuinely never thought about it as anything other than decor until Conrad Salle pointed at it. "Does that thing actually play?" he asked. "Not to anyone in particular. It does, apparently. Sal's head of communications and been mostly quiet all evening, had been sleeping. George plays on weekends. I know George plays on weekends." Sal leaned back in his chair. He had the particular looseness of a man on his third glass of very good Burgundy. "I mean, does anyone here actually play? Because I do. Used to, anyway." He said this the way people said things when they wanted to be asked to elaborate. 12 years of lessons. "My mother's doing." "Conrad," said the angular blonde, was Petra, and she seemed to function as the table's social regulator. "You haven't touched a piano in 15 years. "I keep up," he said, with the confidence of a man who absolutely did not keep up. He looked around the table. "What about you, Arthur?" Dr. Kimball smiled mildly. "I took lessons as a child. Bach inventions, mostly. I wouldn't subject anyone to it now." Sal laughed. He looked around the broader room, expansive in his amusement, and his gaze landed on Celeste, who was refilling water glasses at the edge of the table. She felt it land before she saw it, that particular quality of attention that meant she was about to be made part of something she hadn't agreed to join. "What about you?" he said. She kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry?" "The piano." He gestured toward it. "Do you play?" The whole table was watching now, not with cruelty. Most of them were simply curious, but with that particular cocktail of entitlement and boredom that made wealthy people think other people's private lives were content for the evening. Celeste was aware of her uniform, of the water pitcher in her hand, of the fact that she was 28 years old and had been on her feet for 6 hours and had $73 in her checking account until Friday. "A little," she said. It was the answer she always gave to questions like this, in situations like this. It closed the door politely, without inviting anything further. Conrad Salle was not a man who noticed closed doors. "A little." He repeated it with the tolerant amusement of someone who had just been told something charming and false. That's what people say when they don't play at all. Or, he tilted his head, performing an afterthought. "When they do and they're being modest." "Conrad," Petra said, and there was something warning in it. "I'm just asking." He spread his hands. "Genuine question. You work in a restaurant with a Steinway in the corner, and I'm curious if you've ever touched it. Is that so strange?" It wasn't strange. It was also not what was happening. What was happening was that Conrad Salle was a little drunk and a little bored and had found a variable he could poke at. Celeste understood this with the clarity of someone who had spent years reading rooms for a living. "I should check on your course timing," she said, and moved to step away. "She's dodging the question," Sal said to the table, laughing. Something in Celeste stilled. It wasn't the comment itself. It was the laugh, the particular register of it, the way it said, "She's playing a role and I've just confirmed it." It was the laugh of someone who had never once been wrong in a room and had no framework for the possibility. She turned back. "I play," she said. The laughter faded slightly. Sal raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Yes." He looked at the piano. He looked at her, and then Conrad Salle did what Conrad Salle always did, which was to push the thing one step further, because no one in his life had ever made him pay a price for it. "Prove it," he said. The table went very quiet. Not uncomfortable, not quite. This was still, in their reading, dinner entertainment, but quiet enough that the suggestion had changed shape. Dr. Kimball's expression had shifted into something more careful. Petra put her wine glass down. "Mr. Salle," Celeste said, and her voice was perfectly even. "I'm working. For another hour, probably. The kitchen always runs late on Thursday." He seemed entirely pleased with himself. 1 song. If you can actually play, you'll be done in 5 minutes, and I'll tip you whatever's in my wallet. And I'll tell you right now, it's not a small amount. If you can't, he shrugged. Then we've had a fun 30 seconds and everyone moves on. He looked at the table for confirmation that this was indeed a fun thing. Most of them gave it. This is not really appropriate, Dr. Kimball said, mildly but clearly. Salle waved a hand. Arthur, I'm not putting her on the spot. I'm giving her an opportunity. There's a difference. Celeste stood at the edge of table 7 and felt the specific weight of a moment that had stopped being about wine and dinner service. She thought about the front-of-house manager, who was somewhere near the host stand maintaining professional distance from guests, staff maintaining professional distance from guests. Punzend. She thought about her rent, which was due in 8 days. She thought about a Steinway Model B in a room full of people who thought they already knew the end of this story. She thought about her mother in a hospital bed in Queens 3 years ago, squeezing her hand and saying, "I'm sorry, Celeste, I'm so sorry about school," and Celeste saying, "Don't, Mom, it doesn't matter, none of that matters," and meaning it and also not meaning it, and filing the not meaning it somewhere deep where she didn't look. 5 minutes, she said. Sal's smile broadened. 5 minutes. She set the water pitcher down on the service station with a quiet click and walked toward the piano. She was aware of the room adjusting around her as she crossed it, conversations dipping, heads turning with the social curiosity that a Steinway at a restaurant always prompted when someone was actually about to sit down at it. The front-of-house manager, whose name was Brian and who had a deeply refined instinct for when to intervene and when to let something play out, appeared briefly in Celeste's peripheral vision, and then, very deliberately, did not intervene. She sat down on the bench. The keys were cold. They always were when a piano had been sitting idle. She pressed the middle C, once softly, just to feel the action, and the room she was in, for the span of that single note, receded slightly. Not the room with the brown butter smell and the burgundy and Conrad Salle and his broad waiting smile. A different room, older, smaller. She had learned piano at 10, on a Yamaha upright that her parents had bought second-hand and crowded into the living room of their apartment in Flushing with people, making an investment in something they believed in. Her teacher, Mrs. Antonescu, had been Romanian and exacting and genuinely unkind about sloppiness, and Celeste had loved her completely. And she had practiced 2 hours a day through middle school, 3 in high school, and by the time she was 16, she had placed second at the NESMA regional competition in a division that did not customarily include high schoolers. The judges' written notes, which she still had somewhere, said exceptional sensitivity. Technical development accelerating rapidly. Watch this one. Columbia had given her a partial scholarship for biochemistry, which had nothing to do with piano. She had still practiced in the music building between lab work and problem sets because the piano had never been about the scholarship or the competitions. It had been about the thing Mrs. Antonescu had said once, near the end of their last lesson before Celeste left for college. The music is yours. They cannot take it from you, whatever happens. Whatever had happened was, her mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in the 2nd semester of Celeste's junior year, and her father had had to reduce his hours to caretaking, and the partial scholarship had not covered the gap that created, and Celeste had left Columbia with 72 credits and no degree, and taken the first decent-paying job she could find, which had turned out to be ardent, which had turned out to pay better than she'd expected, which had turned out to be something she was genuinely good at in ways that surprised her. Her mother was in remission now, had been for 14 months. Celeste placed her hands on the keys. She didn't play anything simple. She didn't choose a standard that would have been appropriate and competent and done exactly what Salle expected. Confirmed the light entertainment of the moment and given everyone a pleasant small surprise to remark on briefly before the next course. She understood, sitting on that bench, that he had framed this as something she could only lose. Either she couldn't play, and he was right, or she could play a little. And he was generously entertained. He had not considered a third option. She played the first movement of Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit. She played Ondine. The opening cascades came out of the keys like water, finding its own level. The right hand's shimmering arpeggios first, then the left underneath, and the whole thing built the way Ravel intended. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but with the inexorable accumulation of something too large to stop. This was not a piece for showing off. It was a piece that required the performer to disappear into it entirely. And Celeste had not played it in 8 months, not since the last time she'd found a practice room available at the community center on Tuesday afternoons, and for the first 45 seconds she held the specific anxiety of that in her chest alongside the music. And then she didn't. The room went the way rooms go when something unexpected is happening in them. The particular silence that isn't an absence of sound, but a holding of breath. She was aware of it, the way she was always aware of everything around her. At the edge of her attention, but it didn't reach her. Ondine took the better part of 6 minutes, and she played all of it, including the cadenza in the middle, where the right hand has to sustain a melody against the left hand's cross rhythm without losing either thread, which was the part that had made her cry at 15. When she finally got it right, she did not rush the ending. Ravel didn't write endings to be rushed. The last notes decayed into the room's ambient hum, air conditioning, the distant sound of the kitchen, someone's heartbeat, and Celeste lifted her hands from the keys and sat for precisely 1 second in the silence before it broke. It broke with Dr. Arthur Kimball. He was the first to respond, and he did it without drama. He set down his napkin, pushed back slightly from the table, and began to applaud. Not the enthusiastic performance applause of someone being socially appropriate, the real kind, deliberate and sustained. Petra joined him immediately, then the woman named Daphne, then the rest of the room, table by table, with the cascading momentum of people who had been holding something and were finally allowed to release it. Celeste stood, smoothed her apron, and walked back to table 7. Conrad Salle was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him all evening, which was no expression at all. The performance of ease was gone. He looked for a disorienting moment, simply like a person who had been shown something he hadn't expected. That was, he started, Ravel, she said. Gaspard de la Nuit. First movement. She picked up the water pitcher from the service station. I'll let Brian know you're ready for the next course. Wait. Something in his voice had changed, but the register was different. I need to ask you something. She paused. How long have you been playing? 18 years. He absorbed this. Where did you study? Columbia, she said. Biochemistry. The piano was separate. There was a pause in which she could see him reordering something. You have a degree from Columbia. I have 72 credits from Columbia, she said, and kept her voice completely neutral. I left in my junior year. Something moved across his face, not pity. She was watching for it, prepared to close if she saw it. It wasn't pity. It was something that looked more like the specific discomfort of someone who has just understood the shape of something they were previously ignoring. Dr. Kimball spoke. He had come closer, she realized, during the conversation, had shifted his chair slightly, which was not a thing guests at Ardent typically did. Celeste, he said. What was your major at Columbia? Exactly. Biochemistry, she said. concentration in molecular biology. What year did you leave? She looked at him more carefully. There was something in the quality of his attention that was different from Sal's, different from the room's. It was the attention of a person who was asking questions not to make something of the answer, but because the answer would make something of itself. 2021, she said. He nodded slowly. He had the look of a person doing a calculation. What did you work on while you were there? I was in Dr. Patricia Ewan's lab, Celeste said, and something she normally kept packed very tight loosened slightly in her chest, because it wasn't a thing she talked about at table 7, lipid nanoparticle delivery mechanisms. Early stuff, nothing published. I was an undergrad. She paused. I was working on a thesis proposal when I left. Arthur Kimball looked at her for a long moment. I know Patricia Ewan, he said. We were on a research council together in 2019. He said it with the specific quietness of a person laying a card down rather than playing it. I'm at Harrington Research Institute. We've been building out a molecular biology division for the past 18 months. A pause. We have a fellowship program for non-traditional candidates, people who left strong programs for family circumstances. The room was still doing its restaurant thing around them, other tables, other conversations, the kitchen's distant rhythm, and Celeste stood at the edge of table 7 with a water pitcher in her hand and felt the particular quality of a moment that had no manual for it. I'm not sure I qualify, she said carefully. I am, said Dr. Kimball. If Patricia Ewan's lab was your last placement. He reached into his jacket and produced a card, the understated kind, cream stock, minimal text, and set it on the corner of the table nearest her. If you're interested, no pressure. He said the last part like he meant it. She looked at the card. She looked at him. Conrad Salle, beside her, was uncharacteristically quiet. She had the sense that he was watching this exchange with the particular feeling of a man who had orchestrated a dinner and ended up somewhere he hadn't planned to go. To his credit, and she was careful with her credit, he did not make it about himself. He picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and said to no one in particular, You don't need to. Celeste said, I know I don't need to, he said, and for the first time all evening he sounded like someone having a conversation rather than conducting one. I want to. He looked at the piano. I had 12 years of lessons, he said, quieter now. I thought I was. He stopped. I can play the entertainer, he said finally, slowly. Something in Celeste relaxed because this was the most honest thing he had said all night. The entertainer's a good piece, she said. He laughed. A different laugh than earlier, shorter, less audience-aware. Yeah, he said, it is. She picked up the card from the corner of the table. She looked at it once, slid it into her apron pocket, and returned the water pitcher to the service station. Brian, the front-of-house manager, was waiting for her near the kitchen pass. He had the expression of a man managing several feelings at once. The Ravel was a choice, he said. Yes, she said. A correct choice, it turns out. Go ahead and put in the order for Table 7's next course. And Celeste. He stopped, started again, differently. That piece, the one you played, do you know how hard that is? She thought about Mrs. Antonescu in the small apartment in Flushing that smelled like turmeric and sheet music. She thought about the practice rooms at Columbia, late on Tuesday nights when the building was nearly empty and the Steinways were all hers. She thought about her mother's hands in the hospital and the 100 things she had filed away in the place she didn't look, and she thought about a card in her apron pocket on cream stock with minimal text. Yes, she said, I know how hard it is. She pushed through the kitchen door. Behind her, at table 7, Dr. Arthur Kimball folded his napkin neatly and looked at the piano across the room. For a long moment, The way people look at things they have just understood differently than they had before. He had come to dinner tonight to discuss the second round of funding for a molecular biology initiative that had, until this evening, been 2 candidates, short of full staffing. He thought about a young woman who could sight-read emotional complexity across 2 entirely different disciplines. The kind of mind that didn't turn off when the context changed, and he picked up his wine glass, and he smiled at nothing in particular. And he thought, well, sometimes the room gives you what you need.